My name's Rani Parham. I'm the Manager of Community Life at Bayside Council. Beside me is Jessica Stanley, Community Grants Officer. And welcome to our first of 3 information sessions for our community grants. This session is online and is being recorded, and we will make this available for people afterwards, the recording, and we'll also have this available on our website, on our people. I'd like to start by first acknowledging the traditional owners of the country that we're meeting on today, wherever we might be meeting, and acknowledge elders past, present and those emerging. Here on Bayside, in Bayside Council, we acknowledge the Gadigal and the Bidjigal people as the traditional custodians of this land. Okay, so we've got a PowerPoint presentation for you. I'm just going to share my screen. We're going to take questions at the end of this session, but by all means, if there is anything that you'd like clarified or any sort of information that's not clear as we're going through, please feel free to use the raised hand function on Zoom and we'll come to you. Otherwise, you're free to use the chat function to ask questions throughout the presentation. Firstly, yes, this session is being recorded, so I did mention that, didn't I? Yes, great. We'll kick off. So this is what we're going to be covering today in the session. I think the PowerPoint presentation will run for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have questions afterwards. Obviously, if there are no questions, we might finish early, but I would encourage you to ask questions because this session is for you as prospective applicants, and no question is a silly question. All questions are perfectly valid, and there's no such thing as a silly question. So don't be shy. Please ask away. That's what we're here for. So just a little bit about the Bayside local government area. You can see we've got quite a large geographic space. We span from Hillsdale in the east right over to Kingsgrove in the west, right the way down to Samsuzi in the south and Sandringham, and we up to Rosebery and nudging the city of Sydney. We also have the airport and the port as part of our LGA. We have 5 wards in our local government area, and we have a total population of roughly 176,000 people. Just in terms of a little bit more about our community, we do have a very culturally diverse community in Bayside. About nearly half of our residents were born overseas, and this is the data from the latest census. And we do have just over half of our community speak a language other than English in the home. We do have a community profile, which we're going to do a little bit of a dive into a bit later in the presentation and show you that so you can find that information yourself. But that community profile is located off our website. So we're here to talk about our community grants. We do have an annual allocation for financial assistance, and we are allocating our grants through the Community Grants Program. So these grants are for activity taking place from the 1st of July 2023 through till the 30th of June 2024. And as you're probably well aware, we opened applications on the case day, the 1st of February, and we will be closing our grant applications on Sunday, the 19th of March. So we're giving people quite a bit of time this time, and that's in response to feedback that we had from applicants last year. We gave applicants 4 weeks last year, so we're just giving a little bit more time this year. So I hope that that's going to be enough time for people to get applications in. We do our applications online, and Jessica later in the presentation is going to talk about the Smarty Grants platform and give you a little bit of assistance. So if you do have some issues with the Smarty Grants platform or you've never used it before, then Jessica is always just a ways away, and she's going to talk you through some of the things today as well. We don't accept late applications either, so it's really in your interest to to get your grants all sorted. We offer through our Community Grants Program, we have 2 streams of funding available. The first is our Small Grants Program, which is for funding for up to $2,000. This primarily funds the purchase of resources, purchase of equipment. In the past, community groups or sporting clubs use this to replenish equipment or to purchase more equipment. So clubs might use this to purchase things like additional soccer balls, protective equipment for their members, or we might have community groups who are using these grants to purchase things like printing or graphic design, developing, resources that just needs a real small bit of money to assist. The other grants that we have are our seeding grants that are up to $5,000. And what we're looking for here is innovative ideas. So things that have never happened in Bayside before, or perhaps existing projects that are wanting to have a different slant on it. So trying to approach the project in a different way. And it's quite broad. These could fit within the realm of, community, wellbeing, social, cultural, creative, artistic, and leisure recreation programs. And what we're really looking for with this is ideas that are going to benefit the community and projects that are going to benefit our community. So again, with all of our funding, we want our grants to benefit our residents. So what we look for from applications is that the project or the funded activity has a benefit to majority of Bayside residents. So there are some clubs or some groups or even some service providers that want to apply for funding that maybe provide services or have club members who live outside the Bayside area. That doesn't exclude you from applying for our funding. All we ask is that the majority of recipients or beneficiaries of our funding are Bayside residents. They're living in our community. We're also after activity that can promote increased access or usage of the club or the group or the organisation or the service. So, for example, some things that we funded in the past, sporting clubs, we've funded them to expand programming. So maybe they want to provide, a new experience for residents who are living with disability. So they might be able to apply for one of our grants to enhance their programming so that they're increasing access to their service or to their club for this different demographic group. We also want to see collaboration and resource sharing, recognising that, the greater benefit that comes from a particular or to a service comes from sharing and from networking and from working in partnership. So I think those sorts of things always enhance the scope of a project. So we really do encourage that. And the last thing that we're looking for is that you do establish the need for your project. So we want to see evidence that the project or the funded activity is needed, and we want to see justification to that effect. So that can either be through letters of support or it could be through use of data. And again, we'll talk through our community profile in a little bit, even using that sort of data to justify, your proposed activity. These are all useful resources. So again, what we're looking for really, just to reinforce this, is demonstrating innovation. These are our seeding grants. We want to see an increase in the community's capacity. So what we mean by that is looking at the skills, so people having the skill to do things for themselves, the community having skill to seek out the information and the support that they need. So projects of this ilk that are going to enhance people's, ability to be self-sustaining and reliant, those are always going to be. We also projects that project community harmony and digital perfection. What I mean by that is a community that works well together and lives in harmony is always going to be a resilient community and a community that can look after itself better. We've also in the past funded initiatives that promote health and wellbeing. community. So again, that's developing community capacity. Lifelong learning opportunities. I think a few years ago we gave a grant to University of the Third Age that was looking at helping seniors promote lifelong learning. We also are very keen on initiatives that activate our public spaces. As a local government, we have quite a few public spaces, and obviously we can't activate them all. So we look to our community partners to help us with that, and our grants are a great opportunity for those sorts of projects. Excuse me. Working in partnership, again, as with the small grants, working in partnership is an important aspect of our community grants, and again we would encourage those sorts of projects that are a collaboration. And also, because we do have a very diverse community, encouraging participation from a broad cross-section of the community. So some examples in the past, we've had community groups that they've had a particular project, but they wanted to extend that to a different group. So that might be, for example, a youth group that wants to do a partnership with a seniors centre to work on an intergenerational project. With our eligibility, I think this is pretty standard across the board with government funding. We fund non-profit, non-government incorporated organisations. We fund organisations that are based in the Bayside Council area, but as I've said before, we do have a lot of our services, provide services within Bayside, but they might be based elsewhere. That doesn't preclude you from applying for a grant, as long as you can demonstrate that the majority of the service recipients or the beneficiaries of your proposed project do live in Bayside, then you should be eligible and meet that particular criteria. I need to talk about acquittal, and I know some of you, especially if you've had some of our grants before, would have received emails from Jessica recently encouraging to get your acquittal details, acquittal documentation all finalised. Just to make it very clear about what is an outstanding acquittal, an acquittal is due only once your funded project has ceased. So once it's been completed and it's all finalised, then an acquittal falls due within 6 weeks. Excuse me. So if you haven't finished a funded project, you've had funding from us before, if you haven't finished your project, if you've had an extension approved, then obviously the acquittal's not due because the project is still ongoing. I think in those instances, though, if you're applying for a second grant from us while you still have one on the go, it may be worth your while to justify how you might deliver that second project, given that you still a first one still current. But as with all of this, if you've got any doubts at all, please call Jessica or reach out to Jessica. She's going to be your assistance and your support for these grants. We don't accept applications from for-profit businesses, from government entities, or from private organisations. We also don't accept funding. We don't give funding to political parties or groups that are associated with political parties affiliated. And we also do not fund fundraising organisations, and unincorporated individuals or organisations are also ineligible. But the caveat to that is if you are unincorporated, and a lot of our little community groups are not incorporated, that does not preclude you from applying. It just means that if your application is successful, then in order to receive the grant, you do have to have an auspice organisation who can hold the funds on your behalf. So again, Jessica will be the support if you've got any questions about that, and just getting your application together. If that does apply to you, then you might want to start thinking about who that auspice organisation is, because I think in the Smarty Grants application form, you do need to identify who your auspice organisation will be. So ineligible applications, I think this is something that's worth reinforcing, because we do get quite a large number of applications from our community, and some of them, unfortunately, we do have to reject because they are either late or they're incomplete. And again, please read your application before you submit it, because there's nothing worse than missing something that you might have otherwise have seen on a final review and having it rejected because it's not completed. Anything that's for retrospective, so if you've purchased anything, or if you've already delivered an activity, you can't or you won't receive grant funding for that. So this is only for activity that is taking place in the future, for activity that has already happened. We also prefer not to give our grant funding for ongoing staff or operational costs. So that's not to say that if in delivering your project you do need to employ a staff person. So the example that's an obvious one is if you're running an art class, for example, and you need to employ a facilitator for that period, then obviously that facilitator forms part of the project cost and would be an eligible item of funding. Including a payroll manager in your budget for the art class is not an eligible cost, so that would not be something that would be funded. We're really not keen on giving our grants to services that would otherwise be the responsibility of a state or federal government. Obviously, the state and federal governments can fund their own activities. So we're not keen on funding things like medical equipment or general practice, or educational costs that would be delivered through a public or private school. And also we don't give our community grants to fundraising drives.
So tips for writing your application. So before you start writing, please give yourself plenty of time to plan your application. Make sure that your organisation is eligible for funding, or that you have an auspice or a guarantor organisation. Be clear about what you are funding and for which grant category it does come under. Today I have emailed you quite a few little documents in regards to how to write a grant project, as well as the community guidelines. I can't stress enough, please read the community grant guidelines. This will definitely assist in how you are eligible to apply. Please also make sure your application addresses the Community Grants Program guidelines and policy. Please do some research, provide statistics, find out if there are any similar projects in the area. Look at Council's community profile, as well as the community strategic plan and social plans. And we'll just show you an example.
Just bear with me, I'm going to bring up our community profile just so that you're familiar with what that looks like. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to give you our social plans, things like our reconciliation action plan. We do also have an age-friendly cities plan, and we have a disability inclusion action plan. These are the sorts of documents that you might find very useful as evidence for putting together your application. So this is our community profile, and Jessica will send out the link to this for you, but it's in the presentation as well. So this is based on the census. So every time there's a census, and the most recent one that we had was in 2021, we have a company called ID, which supplies this type of statistical data to councils across Australia. We have them to give the census data to us in this very user-friendly format. So down the side here, you can see there's population. You can look at the age of our residents. You can look at the ethnicity, even the health needs. There is one there under health, which was a new question in the 2021 census, which is long-term health conditions. And that tells you, I think, mental health is the most significant long-term health issue affecting residents in Bayside. This is what we do. So there's some information there about employment and income and volunteering. Down here, we've got some more specific data. So here's the First Nations population in Bayside. We've also got some more data there about the age group. So this is stratified by ethnicity and education. And there's some more information there about recent arrivals. So just very quickly, where there's the orange dots to each of these things that's the 2021 census. So if it hasn't got an orange dot, it means that they're still uploading the 2021 census data into our community profile. So this is really great fun to go and play with. So if you haven't played with this before, I'd really encourage you to do it, because it's just a great way to learn more about our community and making sure that your grant application is going to be really relevant to our people. So I'll just bring back the presentation.
So thank you for that, Rani.
Okay, so once we've got our grant applications, we do assess them, and we use an evaluation panel here at Bayside to give a little bit more transparency and a bit more rigour to our community grants assessment. So we usually use up to four independent community representatives. Usually we try and use state government. We have a number of grants from various state government departments. We try and use representatives from state government, firstly because they're very well versed in, generally speaking, very well versed in the distribution and evaluation of grant funding, and secondly because state government ineligible to apply for our community grants, therefore unlikely to be conflicted. And we usually try and have a couple of council staff, myself as one of them, and another manager, depending on the nature of the applications that we receive. So last year we had quite a few community grant applications from sporting clubs. So we did have the manager of sport and recreation who was able to give a little bit more context and a little bit more detail around some of the requirements for sporting clubs. But we have also used RSL clubs as well. So we have partnerships with RSL clubs through the club grants process. Club grants will be opening in March, I think March, April this year, and that's another funding stream. Once the panel has assessed and made their recommendations, those recommendations are then presented to council for approval. And we are hoping that we can get this round of community grants recommended applicants to council for approval at the May meeting. So fingers crossed that we can get that done, and that will give enough time for the successful applicants to have all of the documentation, funding agreements signed, any other approvals or what have you that might be needed in order to get the grant off the ground, ready in order for projects to kick off from the 1st of July.
So the online process, the online application is very straightforward, so please don't panic. Make sure you are online at this link, baysidenewsouthwales.smartygrants.com.au/grants. Please click the preview and look at the application before you start writing, so you know what information you need to provide. You can go in and out of your online application without losing your information, but take note of your application number just in case. I can't recommend enough, please save your information after you complete each question. So when you're on the form, you'll see there'll be like little paragraphs in each section. If you haven't been on our online form. So I recommend that you save as you complete each one, because you never know, computers do have glitches and can freeze. So save. Scan all your attachments or save them on your computer. This will make it easier for you to upload your attachments to the application form as you go along. What are the required documentation? So you will need to upload the following documents. In incorporated organisations, copy of your current certificate of incorporation. So non-incorporated organisations, you need a letter of approval, as Rani stated earlier, and as well as a support from your auspice or your guarantor, your organisation. A copy of public liability insurance, acquittal forms for any previous council funding, estimates for purchase of equipment and services, and council's consent for projects, building or construction works on council-owned or controlled land.
And I think it's worth, just with that one, just worth pointing out that 9 times out of 10, projects won't need council consent to proceed. There are the odd ones that might, but it's always worth just checking with Jessica if you've any questions, or if you're unclear about anything that might be required for your project, whether it's a mural art project or, installing goalposts or something. Just ask Jessica, and Jessica will be able to point you in the right direction as to whether you've got to get any sort of council development consents.
So examples of suitable documentation. So application for purchase of goods, services or minor works. Substantiated evidence, for an example, written quotes, screenshots of price displayed in supplier's catalogue or website. It's a good idea to have photos and dimensions of proposed equipment where available, for an example, diagrams of work proposed. And now submitting your application. So applications for funding are very competitive. Make sure you've clearly described your project and your objectives. Provide accurate and realistic budget information and attach quotes where applicable. Upload all requested and supporting documents. Please submit your application before midnight on Sunday, the 19th of March.
So I think the reason that we ask people to be very clear about their budget is something that you will be held to. So if your application is successful, you will enter into a funding agreement with council, and that funding agreement sets out the terms and conditions that you as the funded applicant and us as the funding body will abide to for the term of that for the duration of that funding agreement. You also are required, as part of the funding agreement, to expend the funds that you've, as outlined in your application, and within the dates of the funding agreement. So I think just a word on this, it's not something that's set in stone, and there are numerous reasons why, some projects don't proceed or can't proceed as anticipated or as stipulated. And the really good example of that over the last few years is COVID. So I think we had something like 85% of our standard grants from 2019-20 that needed to be either deferred or changed in some way because COVID was just, obliterated all of their plans. And some of those projects that were approved back then are still ongoing today, simply because they've had delay after delay after delay. So for us, we're always very keen to see that funded projects do succeed, and we're always happy to work with you to help you make that a reality. So whether it's, giving you an extension to the time frame, or whether it's, approving amendments to the budget, or even, slightly changing the scope of the project, we're always happy to accommodate that to make it happen. And then lastly, I've already touched on the acquittal report, but what is required is once your project has been completed, is an acquittal report needs to be submitted within 6 weeks. And that acquittal report basically tells us that the project has been finished, what some of the outcomes were, what are some successes that you had, and also, did you spend the money and did you spend it in the way that it was intended? That's the basic tenor of an acquittal report.
So just a friendly reminder, online applications close on midnight Sunday the 19th of March, and you will not be able to access the system after that time. You can get help from Bayside Council by emailing me any questions that you may have at grantsanddonations@bayside.nsw.gov.au or contacting myself on 9366 3671. Thank you.